Last week, I talked about letting go of resistance in order to create change. And this week, I'd like to talk about having the courage to change. Because if we look at it in a kind of step-by-step process, even though I don't like to look at things totally linearly, but if we look at it just by step, we first have to let go of the resistance. We have to come into a place of allowing and accepting, removing the obstacles and basically getting out of our own way. But once we've done that, it's like the opportunity to step into change is right there. It's right before us, but it's really scary. Change is really scary, no matter how much we want it, because it's a change. It's the unknown. It's stepping into the unknown, even if that unknown is exciting. And so it requires a tremendous amount of courage, and courage requires trust. Now, I also want to bring in the element of risk, because there's always risk in what we do, and most often we don't create change because of the fear of risk. So we'll look into how we can be with that. How can we be with risk and change and find courage and embody trust? And we'll see where it takes us. That's what we'll dive into today. This is Corinne Bloom, and you're listening to Raw Conversations. I want to begin by saying that when I use the word change, it's vast, right? It could be that you want to change where the house that you're living in or the area that you're living in. It could be that you want to change your job. It could be that you want to change something in your relationship, or you want to leave your relationship, or it also can mean I want to change patterns and habits and beliefs within myself. So it's not just an external doing thing. Change also represents a change of identity, which a lot of the work that we do, the inner work, a lot of the work that I do with people is literally changing the way that we show up, the way that we relate with ourselves and to others, the way that we, what do we believe about ourselves, about love, about relationship, about others, about our worth, about our careers and our potential. It is a process. I don't normally use the word change because I think it's a transformation, or really in its essence, it's a coming back home to ourselves when I'm talking specifically about the inner work, but change is the catalyst. And so no matter what part of your life, whatever area of your life you might be looking at change in this moment in time, I think it applies. It all applies, right? Because no matter what kind of change, whether it's internal or external of us, which is not separated either, right? Even if you want to take an external step, we have to take our inner self, our inner world with us. And so it is a relationship, first and foremost, with what's going on inside of us in order for us to then be able to make the external change. And actually, when we're doing the internal work, what really shows us the point of evolution and the work that we've done and putting it into action is by making different choices. So you do the internal work and then you learn to show up differently through making different choices. So it always begins within. So I was watching this video of this man was speaking, and I think he sounded a little bit like a life coach, but also was some kind of, a contact improv instructor. And he was talking about risk. But the way that he was talking about it was very interesting, because for me, it kind of missed a part, or maybe a part, I saw it from a slightly different angle, because he was talking about how anything in life has risk. Anything. So obviously he's working within the context of dancers and contact improvisation. And there's a risk, right? You're going into movement. There's no planning. There's no control. You have to be so attuned to the person or people that you're dancing with to fall into a kind of flow, or where there's a point of tension or even conflict, you could say. you have to work with what is. I remember even when I was acting, improv was like, you have to always work with what is in that moment and say yes to it. Don't shut it down. Don't try and control it. Say yes to it. Go with it. So he was saying that life has risk. Everything is a risk. Falling in love is a risk. Starting a new job, moving to a different part of the world, everything has risk in it. Now, the part where I kind of veered off from his perspective was saying that, like, well, because there's risk, you can't. I think he was using trust as a means of like saying, well, you can't trust it because you don't know what it is. So if you don't know what it is, there's not really any trust. You still have to take the risk anyhow. And to a certain degree, like, yeah, we need to take the risk, right? If everything is a risk, we have to just fall into it, and because otherwise we end up doing nothing. However, I truly believe that trust is essential, but the kind of trust that I'm talking about, which maybe he was looking for some kind of physical evidence to allow him to have trust in order to take the risk. And so that's why he was saying, forget about trust, go right into the risk. I actually believe that so much of trust is about trusting the unknown. It's about trusting what we cannot see, what we cannot predict, what we cannot control, what we do not know. And we live in a society that really wants to do all of those things really badly. It does not like the unknown. And yet everything is the unknown. Everything is like the black space around us, the black matter around us. There's so much more of that. And that's the point actually of creation. That's the point of where imagination and creativity and creation can birth itself from that. Like the sound comes out of silence. Creation comes out of nothingness, you could say. What is nothingness, right? But anyway, I digress. I won't get too philosophical, I promise. But trust is really... like, I don't know. I can't see it yet, but I'm willing to take the risk because I know what I want to move towards. And so a big part of trust is, do I trust myself? Do I trust myself when I'm scared and I don't know how to do it, but I believe, I can feel, I have the intuition, I have the instinct, I have the drive, I have whatever it is that arises in you that is drawing you in that direction. And that's where trust comes. I remember saying this to someone like a decade ago that was really struggling with vulnerability. And I said, even though, of course, it helps to have a safe environment, right? Of course, we need that. We need to surround ourselves with people that, we feel safe enough being with and opening up to. However, if we're always waiting for the perfect moment for somebody else to make us feel safe enough so we can be vulnerable, guess what? It might never happen. Because the real sense of safety in our vulnerability is within ourselves. Because actually somebody could really be there to make us feel safe, but if we don't feel safe within ourselves, we won't take the risk. We won't take the risk to be vulnerable because it feels too risky. Until we've really understood what it feels like, okay, I can sit within my vulnerability. I can sit within my tenderness. I can sit within the parts of me that feel scared. And again, that's why the inner work is so important, to recognize, what is your wounding? What does your fear look like? What are you afraid of? What makes you anxious? What triggers you? What do you need? Do you know how to give yourself what you need? And then, as I've said many times before, anything that comes from the outside it just enhances it. It doesn't fill the void, it just enhances it. And it's the icing on the cake, so to speak. And we get to receive it a lot more because we understand what it is. And so when we understand what it is, it's like, okay, I can really let it in. So a lot of it comes down to safety, but safety isn't control. That's the illusion of safety. Again, our society really good at doing that. Let's control everything and then we'll be safe. No, that's prison. That's called prison. So safety, this is all intertwined, right? In order for me to feel safe within myself, I have to trust myself. And trust comes with, I have to also be courageous to be with all of myself, or to be with all of life, and to be with all of the unknown. And that I'm creating this partnership with myself so that I know that in whatever I step into that isn't unknown, I'm going to be okay because I'm there with myself, for myself, taking care of myself. I will not abandon, I will not reject, right? So whether it's an internal change or an external change, we're going to meet that point of either this scares me, this is too hard, I don't know how to do this, easier said than done. We're going to meet that point of resistance. And so this goes back to last week. Can we allow? And we allow by accepting what is. Okay, right now in this moment, I feel anxious. I feel scared. I don't know if I can do it. So again, that might be the external. It could be, I want to change my geographical location. That's what I'm coming up against right now. And it's like, okay, I've removed some blocks and barriers, and now it's like change is like, okay, you can do it. And now then there's like the, oh shit, how do I do it? In what way am I going to do it? Where am I going to go? You know, and the thing is, a lot of times fear is caused by overwhelm, which is caused by just too many thoughts in our mind. And so it's really important to come back into the body and come back into the present moment and come back into just right now, right here, I'm okay. You know, it's just normally a physical, the physical experience is created by an emotional or mental response. So, but the change could be moving. It could be, I want to leave this relationship, or it could be, I want to go on a date with this person. And that really scares me. So let's look at the external first, even though I always start with the internal, but let's look at the external first as a gateway. So you meet that point of the resistance comes in because maybe fear or anxiety or overwhelm or stress or whatever it is, like it feels really big, like you're looking up at the mountain that you're about to climb or whatever. It doesn't have to be a mountain. You're looking at the distance between where you are now and where you want to get. And remembering that the only way you're going to get there is step by step by step. So that's why it's so important to be here first, be on 2 feet first. But that moment where you feel a little bit the resistance, so okay, can you come back and allow? Can you breathe? Can you come back into this present moment? Are you trusting yourself? Are you trusting that if you feel drawn to move in that direction, that everything will support you to get there as long as you allow and you soften into and you don't get in your own way? Now, again, we haven't been taught that like everything's going to work out. Like if you look at our society, I haven't watched the news in 20 years. Obviously it gets filtered in by social media, which is really annoying because when I didn't have a television, it was great. I didn't have to turn on the television or turn on the radio. Because if you haven't already noticed, it's all negative. It's virtually all negative. And so it wires our brain to always think that there's going to be something wrong. Something is going to happen that's going to go bad or go wrong. And so we don't live in a very optimistic society that's like, well, what if it all works out? What if it's all okay? What if you're totally going to be taken care of? And that is a profound trust in the unknown. So there's a little bit of rewiring that has to happen there and a little bit of going against the mainstream, because if the mainstream tends to be quite negative, and I am sensitive to the fact that there's a lot of really heavy stuff that's going on in the world right now. So you might point to it and go, well, duh, Corinne, look at what's going on. But there's always been that stuff going on, always. And to be honest, staying in that kind of mentality isn't actually going to support the matter. What is required in our world is a hell of a lot more love, joy, compassion, kindness, softness, gentleness. So don't underestimate having a different perspective and doing it a different way. So coming back, the courage to make that change is in trusting that everything is going to be okay. There might be obstacles and challenges. It might take effort. It does take effort. However, when we really have this perspective of what if it's all going to be okay, and you just let go of the stress and let go of the what ifs, that's when we fall into a greater sense of flow, because we're getting out of our own way, so to speak. We're in that state of relaxation versus tension. Now, one thing I want to bring up is that this has just come in, so I'm gonna segue into this, which goes more into the internal, especially when we're doing an internal change of our behavior and our belief systems, and we're changing patterns, especially when it comes to love, because that's kind of the most vulnerable dynamic within us. Our mind wants to go to, yeah, but it's been this way. It wants to go into the past and prove that it's not going to be possible in the future, because look at how the past has been. But we have to remember that the past has been that way because we have made certain choices based on certain belief systems that have created certain patterns. And that's habitual and it's familiar to us. And so that's why we continue to replicate it. So when we come to that point of, I'm going to make a change, it's scary to make that change because it's literally changing the fiber of our being, our identity, our very identity. Now, in theory, the essence of who we are, we're not changing that. We're actually returning to that. What we're changing is who we believed ourselves to be. So our mind might go, yeah, but that was really hard in the past, or it didn't work out like that in the past, or look at what happened, or that was, I keep on, the same type of guy or girl comes into my life, or the same thing happens at work. And we kind of then go, oh, I predict what it's going to be like. And in that way, we're already setting ourselves up for kind of disappointment and defeat and quote unquote failure, for lack of a better term. And that's when we go, God, why is nothing in my life changing? Because we keep on making the same choices, because we keep on perceiving things through the same lens. So the lens could be scarcity. It could be, rejection. It could be not good enough. It could be I'm not worthy. It could be I don't feel supported. Whatever the story is. So the courage sometimes comes in to just say, you know what, I'm going to take the risk to not play the same story and narrative and believe the same beliefs. Even if we believe ourselves to have proof and evidence, because that's the thing, is beliefs look for evidence. To say, see, look, you're not good enough. So I want to use an example that came out of a session, but sometimes I feel a little bit like mindful, even though I would never mention names, but it's a sensitive thing. But so I'm going to see if I can do it in a slightly different way. So this person was sharing about how this other person had responded to them via text messaging. And this other person was really kind of flip-flopping in the way that they were showing up. Basically, from the outside, I could see that this person isn't showing up with integrity and maturity. And my client, where they went to was a place of, I'm not worthy. Oh, look at this person is not, I'm at the bottom of their priority list. So that's the old belief. The old belief is I'm not worthy, I'm not good enough. Nothing is going to change. It's going to be the same thing. I keep on attracting the same kind of guys. They don't prioritize me. They don't blah, 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 all of this, right? And I said, well, what if you were to switch that completely, turn it on its head? And instead of going to what you believe about yourself from a sense of lack, if you were coming from a place of self-worth, how would that look? And how I would see it is from a place of self-worth. I'd go, you know what? I don't want to spend time with this person. because they're super flaky and they keep on flip-flopping and they're not showing up with integrity. So I don't want to give them my time or energy. Period. I deserve more than that. Do you see what I mean? So sometimes the courage to change our perspective, it's stepping into an unknown way of being or an unknown way of perceiving reality. And you can see that the first choice, the reflection of I'm not worthy, it's about me not being a priority, would continue the story and the habits and the beliefs of I'm not good enough. And see, life is showing me I'm not good enough because I'm not a priority, versus actually, that's just your perception. Because the opposite of that is he's not showing up good enough. He's not showing up in good enough ways. Why would I put up with that? Why would I want to give this person my time if they're kind of saying one thing and doing another thing, saying one thing and then changing what they're saying in the next moment? So sometimes we have to go outside of our comfort zone. And it sounds weird because we think that comfort zone sometimes is like a happy place to be, but it's not. Sometimes our comfort zone is just literally what's familiar, and what's familiar sometimes is not beneficial. Most of the time is not beneficial to who we are because it's representative of all the ways in which we do not believe in ourselves and our inherent worth. And so that's where sometimes it's hard to find the courage to change because we're so afraid that we're going to keep on replicating. Life is going to keep on doing to us. Again, that's the victimization, doing to us what it has in the past. But it hasn't been doing anything to us. It's just literally the way that we've been perceiving a situation. And we can perceive the same situation in totally different ways. That's why, like when working with couples, I always say there are two truths in this situation. There's never just one, because both individuals will see the situation from completely different angles, from completely different perspectives, because they have completely different beliefs. Or maybe they have a similar belief, but the way that it plays out and the way they cope with it and the way they behave and they react to it is different. And often relationships our wounding can attract each other, right? So we can trigger, it can feel like we're coming from opposite ends. So coming back to this internal change and the whole kind of, well, it wasn't like that in the past, or easier said than done, or I'm too scared to make that change, I don't know how to do it. It comes back to the same principle of, are you in a state of tension and resisting? Can you come back to exhaling, breathing, letting go, softening? Can I allow what is in this moment? Can I accept it? And then can I feel my presence? Can I feel myself being there? Even if you still feel I'm not good enough, I'm not worthy, I don't know how to do this, I'm scared, I'm anxious. But then the invitation is, and how can I do it differently this time? Change invites us to do it different. And so it might feel really weird and awkward and uncomfortable, but where it will lead us to has to be better than where we are if where we are hasn't been serving us because we're coming from a place of lack. Does that make sense? So we have to be willing to do it differently. And here comes the risk, because we don't know what the result is going to be. Now, the irony is if we do it the same way, it's not as big of a risk, even though in a way it is, because emotionally it's causing us suffering. But it feels like less of a risk because it's familiar. But the risk comes in of like, am I willing to do it differently? And I don't know what the outcome is going to be like. The old way, we do kind of know what the outcome is going to be because it's not going to be nice, but we'll know what it is. And so then in a way that feels safer. So we have to stretch outside of our comfort zone, take the risk, be willing to do it differently to create the change that is actually going to bring us to where we want to be. And where we want to be isn't necessarily a place or a relationship or a new job. It's a state of being. And that state of being is one of I'm at peace with myself and my experience. So that even if there are challenges along the way of creating change, even if there are awkward, embarrassing moments, even if there are scary, stressful moments, it's okay because we're at least creating movement. Change is also about creating movement and getting out of the stagnancy that we've been in. The familiar, the known, the routine, the rut. And when we've really been in a routine, you know what? Yeah, it's going to be scary to change it up, but it's also going to be enlivening. And I always say the point where we're at before we've done the work and taken the steps, that's the scariest point. It's not when we actually start doing the inner work and going in and looking at the shadowy parts within ourselves that we don't want to look at, or we start taking the steps to create the change that we want in the external world. Once we create that motion and momentum, it gives us energy because it's shifting things. Stagnancy is the hardest place for our being, for our soul, if you will, because there's no growth in it. And stagnancy is what often leads to depression, which just means our spirit is depressed. It's not in movement. And movement doesn't mean doing. Movement means that it's alive and it's engaged and there's energy flowing through our being. Being is not a state of non-doing. Being is very much alive. So that's another kind of mega misconception in our culture sometimes. So wrapping this up, change is going to be scary. The risk is going to be there. But I love the quote by Anais Nin that goes something around like the risk to remain tight in a bud became more painful than the risk it took to blossom. And I think that is so beautiful, right? That's where the point comes in, that sometimes our being, especially if we're walking an awakened path, that our being puts a little bit of pressure on us and says, actually, if you remain tight in a bud, that's going to be, it might feel safe, but it's going to be much more painful. And when that kind of the seesaw tips and you recognize actually that's far more painful than the risk it takes to blossom, the risk it takes to change, the risk it takes to grow, because I'm stepping into an unknown. But who knows, maybe that unknown is going to be so much better. Or maybe it's just going to be okay. Like, never mind the better, because then it kind of implies that where we are is worse, and it's not better or worse or good or bad or right or wrong. But what we're shifting into is a different experience. And when we can really trust ourselves and life, like, what if it was all going to be okay? What if? Because one thing I will say just quickly is, when I went traveling in my 20s around Southeast Asia for 6 months with a boyfriend at the time, you know, there was fear going into it and it was big unknown. Where am I traveling? Like coming from America, it's like the entire world is really scary. And then you end up being in the rest of the world and you're like, yeah, it's not that bad. Actually, America's pretty scary. But that's neither here nor there. But, you know, stuff came up. I got into some pretty hairy experiences a couple times, and you know what? I'm still alive. It's okay. There are so many times where I could look back and go, wow, I've gone through some challenging moments. But that's also what builds resilience. You know, you could stay at home and stay in your living room and watch Netflix for the rest of your life and be safe. But would it feel fulfilling? Would it bring meaning to you? On your deathbed, will you have any regrets? Some people might say, no, that's great. I want to live my life like that. Okay, fair enough. But I would venture to say that most of you would say, no, that's not the life I want to live. So if you want to live an enlivened, awakened life, you're going to have to take the risks. You will create change inevitably just because you will want to continue to grow. Not because where you are isn't good enough or who you are isn't good enough, but just because we're here to expand and to grow and to evolve. But trusting yourself is vital. It's really vital. So just remembering the practical steps are, am I in a state of tension and resistance? Can I exhale and soften and allow, accept what is? Can I remove the barriers and the obstacles that are within me? And then when there's the opportunity for change, am I willing to take the risk to move in that forward direction, to show up differently, to make different choices? And do I trust myself in that process? So, food for thought. Take it or leave it as feels right for you, and loving you from afar. I'm adding on a bit here because after recording that, I wanted to go back to that video that I mentioned in the beginning because I thought I'm not remembering something correctly here. And I was right. I didn't remember it all correctly because he wasn't so much speaking to trust, even though that's relevant. And I'm glad that it took me into where it took me with the conversation today. But what he was referring to is there are no safe spaces, that everything entails a certain element of risk, and there are no safe spaces because we cannot know. But this is where I veered off, because for me, safety is not a space, it's a state of being. So it still ties into the kind of steps that I gave you, which was, in order to create change or to do anything really, there's an element of risk, and risk requires courage, and courage requires trust. And when we trust ourselves, we create safety within us. And safety is simply a state of being. And once we feel safe, guess what? We have the courage to take the risk to create change. So it all loops in together. So I just wanted to add that on because it's really important to mention that. So hope that helps. Loving you from afar. You've been listening to Raw Conversations with Corinne Bloom. Thanks so much for showing up, listening in, and being a part of the conversation with me.